Imagine an army of 18 million men led by a ruthless demagogue high on speed, cocaine, and adrenaline. What could go wrong? I'm Indy Neidell. This is a World War II in real-time special. Now, it is often pointed out that Hitler, Adolf Hitler, whatever his shortcomings, was a vegetarian, didn't drink alcohol but preferred herbal tea, and was a non-smoker, even a fervent anti-tobacco activist. All of that is true, but that does not change the fact that his record shows many more, much more disturbing personality traits. In fact, let's just say it how it is. Adolf Hitler was not a very stable guy. Beyond the stupefying amount of mass murder he initiated, the crazy wars, and his complete absence of compassion and empathy with his victims, Hitler vacillated between being a very gentle and sympathetic host in private to throwing tantrums and screaming like a furious baby at his generals and the rest of the Nazi Party leadership when he did not get things like he wanted. From listening attentively to advice and making quick and accurate conclusions with a steadfast resolve, to irrationally changing his mind and his plans based on inaccurate conclusions against the explicit advice of all his experts. From waxing lyrical about absurd dreams of greatness to which he would propel Germany, to despondently foreseeing the demise of his own person and the entire German culture. From extolling his own amazing powers and abilities to whinging about a number of real and imaginary symptoms of disease he thought he was suffering from, imaginary disease he often believed he had contracted from the Jews, by the way. Now, you can diagnose Hitler and theorize that the reason for all of this was that he was simply nuts, a sociopath hypochondriac. Or perhaps you think he was really a sickly, suffering man that was just doing what he needed to achieve his goals, a ruthless but rational mass-murdering dictator. Or you can come up with any number of theories about his pathology. We shall never know, as we cannot actually diagnose the man posthumously with any reasonable accuracy. And as we shall see, his medical records have a serious flaw, namely his doctor's total incompetence as a man of medicine. But we do know one thing for a fact that surely contributed to his instability starting at the latest in 1936 and up until his death. He was a meth head. Wait. He was actually an equal opportunity dope fiend with an impressive daily intake of a great variety of psychoactive drugs. The origin of this mess was that doctor I mentioned, who was also Hitler's confidant and on-staff drug dealer, Dr. Theodor Morell. In the late summer of 1936, Adolf Hitler was suffering from intermittent, debilitating stomach cramps. His personal photographer, Heinrich Hoffmann, referred him to a certain Dr. Morell, whom Hoffmann claimed had saved his life. Morell was a socialite physician that had used his wife's fortune, she was the famous actress Hannelore Müller, to set himself up with a fashionable, super-equipped luxury practice where he treated the rich and famous, specializing in skin and venereal diseases. He had a preference for alternative medicine that had questionable efficacy, but he soon learned to spike his otherwise useless cures with psychoactive drugs that at least made his patients feel better pretty much immediately, albeit short term. Since many of the preparations he administered were highly addictive, it also had the effect of creating a faithful, ever-growing, returning patient roster. So in 1936, Dr. Morell examines the Fuhrer and gives him a cocktail of drugs, vitamins, and bacterial cultures that supposedly cure Wolfie's stomach cramps and makes him feel just great. Hitler is so elated that he makes Morell his personal physician on the spot. He also proceeds to recommend him, well, more like foist him, on the rest of his inner circle. Albert Speer, Hitler's architect, who is perhaps at this point the closest thing to a personal friend the Fuhrer has, soon suffers from similar stomach cramps. This is how Speer later describes the event. In 1936, when my circulation and stomach rebelled, I called at Morell's private office. After a superficial examination, Morell prescribed for me his intestinal bacteria, dextrose, vitamins, and hormone tablets. For safety's sake, I afterward had a thorough examination by a real internal medicine specialist. I was not suffering from any organic trouble, he concluded, but only from nervous symptoms caused by overwork. I slowed down my pace as best I could, and the symptoms abated. To avoid offending Hitler, I pretended that I was carefully following Morell's instructions, and since my health improved, I became for a time Morell's showpiece. Hermann Goering and Heinrich Himmler are somewhat suspicious of their leader's pet chemist. Eventually, part of the treatment is an injection of what Morell calls Vitamultine, which Morell claims is just glucose and vitamins, which he administers to Hitler when he's feeling groggy. Himmler snatches one of those golden bags, and they are literally golden bags, and has SS physician Ernst Günther Schenk analyze the content. It turns out to be mostly methamphetamine. They are a bit alarmed, and hey, Goering should know, he himself is a recurring heroin and morphine addict who has been in and out of rehab since the Great War, where he became addicted to medicinally prescribed heroin and morphine in the first place. But it's the Fuhrer, you know, so who's going to tell him? Well, no one is going to tell him, because it's better to have a meth head as your leader than to lose your own head. But they do conclude that the doctor is indeed a quack, and they themselves stay clear of Morell. The Fuhrer, on the other hand, does continue to follow Morell's prescriptions, and by the early 1940s, the doctor is taking Hitler on a daily roller coaster of uppers and downers, meth and testosterone in the morning, cocaine and adrenaline during the day, barbiturates and bromide in the evening to take the edge off and let him sleep. All of this is rounded out with a mixture of antispasmodics, anti-inflammatory medicine, and regular vitamins. Morell writes down his regimen meticulously in his patient records, and doctors analyzing his notes after the war will conclude there doesn't seem to be much physically wrong with Hitler's health at this point, other than that he's an addict, of course. Now, the side effects of addiction tend to be a number of things you maybe don't want in a leader, such as erratic behavior, emotional instability, lack of focus, irritability, drowsiness, and delusions, just to mention a few. Now, considering that Hitler had displayed some worrying signs of suicidal depression already in the 1920s, was at times described as manic many years before Morell came along, and was, as is clear from his own writings, pretty seriously delusional from the get-go, this cannot be a good thing. More than anything, the Nazis have a potential press relations disaster here. You see, the wholesome image of Hitler as a healthy, non-smoking, teetotal vegetarian, far above the intoxicated masses, was a key motivator of the Fuhrer's cult of personality. In theory, drug abuse in the Third Reich was strictly illegal. Drug addicts and drug dealers faced draconian punishments. For them, it was cold turkey, and if you happened to not be part of the master race, it was into a cold train wagon and straight off to concentration camp. In many cases, drug addicts considered belonging to a lesser race were even euthanized under the T4 program. The anti-drug propaganda was even merged into the Nazi anti-Semitic tropes by equating Jewish businesses with drug rings and declaring it all as part of the same toxic brew. The Nazi wonderland of Aryan heroes, the Fuhrer's children, did not, supposedly, indulge. However, in reality, it was, as Norman Ohler says in the beginning of his book, Blitzed, Drugs in Nazi Germany, National Socialism was toxic. And Ohler means that quite literally, because in contrast to the propaganda message, the Nazis themselves were not just addicts like Hitler and Goering, but also among the, and possibly the, biggest drug dealers in the world at the time. I am not making that up, nor am I just sensationalizing, and that is what we will look at in our next episode of Nazis on Crystal Meth. In case you're just discovering us, in our regular episodes, we cover World War II week by week in real time, which we began doing September 1st last year. So you don't have too much to catch up on. Check out the episode playlist right here. And since our content is often demonetized, the YouTube algorithm does not recommend our videos very well. So share the heck out of this and activate notifications. And please join the Time Ghost Army, which funds this channel at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. See you next time.